All right, thanks for attending my talk, um, where I'm going to discuss Entra ID authentication on Linux, on SUSE specifically. I ask that you save questions to the end because I have way too much material and I'm probably not going to get to all through it. Or if necessary, you can talk to me afterwards. So, as an introduction, I want to talk to you about kind of the history of why this project exists and some of our goals of the project. So, this project started out in early 2023. Microsoft had requested a Linux compatibility layer for their what they called at the time Azure Active Directory. And they brought together representatives from various major distros. Um, and we had discussions together. The goal was to develop one unified approach, which didn't end up happening, but that was the goal. We're kind of still moving in that direction, though. So the plan was that the distros would handle the PAM and NSS authentication, and Microsoft dictated that they would be providing the backend authentication code as a proprietary binary that they'd be installing on our Linux devices. So Canonical started expressing concerns that Microsoft was basically dictating to us and telling us what to do and not actually doing any work. It was just meeting after meeting of planning meetings to plan meetings to plan meetings. And then I objected to this idea of Microsoft providing all this proprietary binaries to ship on our distribution. So kind of out of the blue, Canonical released AAD Auth, which was a package that it was a loose attempt at authenticating Entra ID on Linux. So they provided a NSS module for doing name resolution, a PAM module for authentication, and then there was no database, or I'm sorry, there was no daemon in the backend, but they had a database that the NSS and PAM modules communicated with and fetched information from. So the NSS module would store the user information in the database, and the PAM module pulled it out when it was doing authentication. Their library was, their AAD Auth was relying on Microsoft supplied libraries that are open source. They do have some open source libraries for providing very basic authentication. It did have one major flaw, Canonical's package, and that was that Microsoft would send an MFA demand when MFA was required, and Canonical's package would simply ignore the demand and let the user in. So they treated a demand for MFA as okay, we can go in, which was not a good idea security-wise. But of course, they weren't providing secure or single sign-on because they couldn't actually get the access tokens. So it wasn't breaching Entra ID per se, but it was allowing users to log in that should have provided MFA. Around late 2023, Microsoft paused the collaboration efforts, which had kind of just drawn on in endless meetings at that point. I did attempt to package Canonical's AAD Auth for OpenSUSE, and I found it to be really low quality, like I mentioned. So I started a new project, and this new project, I originally called it MSOL for Rust. It's been renamed Himmelblau after the project that implements it now. And then I collaborated with William Brown and the ConEDM team, and I forked their client code because ConEDM provides a OAuth2 client, and it was a suitable fit for a Himmelblau client. Yeah. So Himmelblau was born. The goals of the project and the eventual end goals was to provide MFA support through PAM, to enroll the devices in Entra ID so they could be viewed and monitored from Entra ID, to provide policy enforcement through Intune. And then we didn't want to have any proprietary Microsoft components in the code, and we did not want, and then we wanted security and maintainability as like the core of the project. As the project picked up steam and there was rapid adoption, I spent more and more time on this. So let's talk a little bit about how fast the project has picked up. In the beginnings of the project, this is only just the end of last year. But if I were to stretch this out further, it's been going on a couple of years now. I was seeing a couple of downloads a month. This is starting the end of last year. It started to pick up just a little bit. And then you can see here in January of this year, I suddenly saw a rather large peak. 200 users started downloading the stable version of 0.8. There were some fixes after that were released under the 0.8 label, but a lot of people downloaded this version, used it, and then eventually adopted 0.9. I saw a similar trend with 0.9. Now, if we go to this next one, you can see 0.8 and 0.9, and then this happened in March. So this is the 0.98 release. 0.98 was probably the first really stable release of the 0.9 version, and you can see we've almost tripled our download count. And this green line here shows the website activity, and the website activity peaked only recently at about 1,400 users per. I think that's per day. So these are total download counts, and this is just counting the primary Himmelblau package. There's also alternative packages. So this is just meant to mirror which users were downloading everything, essentially. Down here, this one was released during the conference just a couple days ago, and it's already seen about 50 downloads as of yesterday. So we're seeing a lot of interest in the project. The adoption rate is growing. For 0.98, we were seeing 500 downloads in just a matter of a couple of weeks. So here's some information from stats from the website that I'm hosting for the project. We're seeing a peak of nearly 900 downloads per week at times, various versions. We're seeing an increase in visitors to the website, including the GitHub repository. We've got a few forks and stars, but this one's interesting, and this graph reflects that, how since about mid-February, the website traffic has been climbing. It did dip a little bit the last couple of weeks, and maybe that's due to the fact that I haven't had a major release recently. But we've seen a total of 18,000 active users on the website. Over 5,000 downloads now. That's a little outdated. And traffic globally hitting the website. We're seeing a lot of different regions here. Russia is excluded because they can't use Entra ID. They're banned. So that's the reason why that's black there, or gray, I guess. Anyway. But otherwise, it's most of the world. There's people actively using Himmelblau globally. Interestingly, I noticed that our number one user base seems to be in India. I did get contact from a call center in India that was deploying it at several call centers, so maybe that's what that is. Okay, so let's. Oh, I bumped the mic again. I'm sorry. Let's talk about some of the current features in Himmelblau. We currently provide RFC 2307 ID mapping, which means that we can synchronize UID, GID, geckos, et cetera, attributes of a user from on-prem Active Directory, which simplifies migration from on-prem. Because now people deploying Himmelblau can migrate from on-prem enrollment to Entra ID enrollment and keep the same user IDs, same users, et cetera. We support cloud-only deployments as well as on-prem. And then we've also got UPN ID name mapping, which uses the same ID mapping code that SSSD is providing. although I need to make some changes here to align better with the way they're doing their ID mapping. Various authentication methods. We support Hello PIN, true Hello PINs mimicking Windows behavior with TPM key locking, etc. Password-only authentication is technically supported if the device is enrolled. This mirrors the same behavior Microsoft provides on Windows. I actually did not know that password-only authentication was still allowed until that I was reached out to by a customer who pointed out that they could still disable MFA authentication, and it does work. But it takes some fancy footwork in Entra ID to do it. We support device authorization grant authentication, the same as Ubuntu and FreeIPA provides now in their solutions. We also have experimental MFA authentication, so we can do FIDO, key auth, Microsoft Authenticator, third-party authenticator apps, SMS verification, etc. So you can use your YubiKey, for example, to authenticate to a host. This doesn't work. So YubiKey does not work when you're remote. You're accessing a box remotely via SSH, for example, because we don't have a way to pass those keys yet. There's name mapping, customization options, login scripts for enforcing some compliance policies. Also, this is brand new, Intune policy enforcement. This is Microsoft's MDM service for enforcing policies on client devices. And I've recently figured out the protocol to be able to enroll and report back policy compliance. So we can execute the Intune script policies and then a Linux compliance policy, which can enforce various things, such as marking the device compliant or allowed distributions, device encryption, minimum passwords, and so on. So this is brand new. It'll be released in version 1, coming up here soon. We also support single sign-on for Chrome, Chromium, and Firefox. This is made possible through a browser plugin supplied actually by Siemens. They wrote this app to be compatible with Microsoft's proprietary code, and I've written a dbus broker service for Himmelblau that mirrors Microsoft's service, therefore giving us SSO for free, basically. So when a user logs into the host, they can open up a browser and automatically they're logged in. This SSO tool is actually useful also for it's being utilized by some organizations to supply credentials to like login scripts and things, and for enforcing compliance policies on servers. So this isn't just useful for users sitting in front of a desktop. It's also useful because that dbus service can be utilized to fetch tokens for other kinds of compliance. Okay, I am going to do a quick demo. I'm going to try to do this live. And hope that it works. So the network here has been a little bit unreliable, but the last few days it has worked. This machine is a Leap 15.6 machine. It is already configured for Himmelblau. I figured I'd spare you the nitty-gritty details about that. But I'm going to go ahead and authenticate. This is the first time authenticating for any Himmelblau user. I'll authenticate as my Entra ID user. Notice I don't have to enter the full name because it's mapping my CN name to my... oh, I don't have my phone. Thank you. I got to authenticate using my phone. So the Authenticator app pops up and prompts for that 74. I'm going to plug that in and approve it. Okay, and that was approved, but this is going to take a couple of seconds because it is now enrolling the device in Entra ID. After it finishes enrolling the device, it's going to prompt me to set up a hello pin. There, as the screen falls asleep. So I'm going to set my hello pin. I have to confirm. And that pin will be utilized to lock and unlock a TPM key, TPM bound key that I can use to authenticate to Entra ID. Every time I enter that pin from now on, that pin will be utilized to unlock the TPM key, and the private key can be used to request tokens from Entra ID. So I successfully authenticated. I'll show you the single sign-on. You'll see it just installed the browser plugin. It popped up and it authenticated me right there. I can't read check, but I think this is the one that says I approve.
Yeah.
Oh, good. And it just signed me into Office 365. I can also authenticate to the Microsoft portal, the Azure portal, I mean, and it will automatically sign me in. There it goes. Another cool feature, we open the terminal. Hopefully that's big enough for you to see. If I K-list, you see I have a Kerberos credential from Entra ID. Yeah. I just installed this yesterday. Apparently there's, whatever. Okay. Log out of there. Okay, and now you see it has also downloaded my profile picture. Yay, fancy. And if I click on that now, you see it prompts me for a Linux hello pin. I had to specify that because a couple of users who tested out said, oh, do I enter my hello pin for my Windows desktop? No, you do not. How about trying the one you just signed up for on your Linux box? So you see, we just authenticated using a cryptographically bound TPM key. Okay. I'll log out of that, and I'm going to switch now. We're going to access the same host. Clear that. Using that same, let's see if I can make that bigger for you. I think it's 122.75. I might have the IP address wrong. Actually, I think it's 14. I might have to go back in and check. I should have prepared for that. There we go. It's asking me for my hello pin. And you can see again, I can K-less. There's my Kerberos creds. I'm going to exit out of that, and let's try. I'm just going to copy my ID over there. So, and now I can authenticate without credentials or with our, my SSH key. And I still have my Kerberos TGT there. All right. Okay, let me go back down. And we'll continue this here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what you just saw. But there was a lot that went in behind that. It looked maybe simple. I presented this to some people before, and they said, oh, that doesn't look all that interesting. Well, you don't know what's going on behind the hood. So authentication options that we support, that Microsoft supports. I'm going to talk about basic OAuth stuff for Entra ID. Microsoft still supports basic authentication, username and password. They've officially deprecated this, but technically it still works. And some people, despite my protestations, are still doing it. We also, Microsoft supports this device authorization grant, where a user completes the authentication on another device. It's good for headless environments, and it is also really easy to implement over PAM because then you don't have to do any fancy footwork. This is currently the only option for authenticating on Ubuntu's Auth-D, which is the replacement for AAD auth, and Red Hat's free IPA. This is the only option that they provide. Now, that is going to change because after I have talked to people at both Red Hat and Canonical, they will be using Himmelblau as the backend for their products moving forward. So we now have a common platform for Entra ID auth. And in fact, a Canonical employee has already started contributing to Himmelblau, the backend for Himmelblau. So the other option that Microsoft provides for Entra ID authentication is interactive authentication, which requires a browser to complete the login. We don't have a browser at the GDM login screen. We don't have a browser at the terminal. I did try using a browser-based terminal. That doesn't work. But I tried multiple times. Okay, so Himmelblau actually automates the interactive flow. That's what you saw when I was authenticating with MFA using my MS Authenticator app. That's what you saw in the demo, was this, it's a experimental flow. Now, while it's experimental, I have tested a lot of scenarios with a lot of customers. I've tested with Chinese endpoints and US government endpoints, and they're completely different, by the way. And so far, most things work. But there are a lot of edge cases, and there are a lot of places that we are probably still missing little details. So the way that that flow works is that it parses and submits web forms. Fortunately, Microsoft provides this JSON blob on every page to keep track of where you are and where you need to go next. And parsing that JSON tells us every step that we need to take during the authentication. So let's talk a little bit about the protocols and specifications. These are not officially documented, most of them, by the way. Microsoft has provided a little bit of documentation. Most of it's wrong. So what I'm calling MSDRS, the Device Registration Service, I found somewhere inside of their packet traces. At one point they called it this, so I'm calling it that as well. So while not officially documented, this is where we do the join or registration or hybrid join. Those are different things, slightly different. Right now we only do a join because a join lets us authenticate to the cloud only, but it also gives us on-prem access. We can access device certs, get PRT access, and so on. This is how a device enrollment works. I won't go all through the nitty-gritty details, but basically we request an appropriate token, access token. We send that along with a really specially crafted enrollment request, and they send back a certificate that we can use during our authentication later. By the way, down here, I said MDM enrollment is not implemented. It is now. That's in tune. I finally got that working. The broker extensions, these are mostly right. This is actually a published protocol definition. There are bits that are entirely wrong. And from my understanding, Microsoft started documenting the Entra ID behavior, and then they stopped. And so this particular document is mostly right, but there's a couple of sections that have been completely rewritten, and they don't operate this way anymore. But the broker extensions tells you how to get access tokens and PRTs, and then how to use these custom headers to make special requests. It explains how to get a primary refresh token, which is like a special all-powerful token that lets you request other tokens. The refresh token is something that you only request occasionally, and then you use it to request other tokens. We can only get a primary refresh token if we have an enrolled device, and that's critical. And that's I won't explain all the details, but this is basically how you get that special token, and that's what the request looks like as a version 2 request. There's also a PRT v3 type, but if we request a token with PRT v3, it ignores the TGT request. I don't know why, and so I don't send a v3 request. And Microsoft officially supports both protocol versions, so we'll just stick with the version 2 for now. I'm assuming they just haven't finished implementing version 3, but they don't tell us these things. That's what the request message looks like in there. This is if you strip it open, that's the basics of the inside of the JWT, which is a JSON web token. This is kind of what the response looks like. You'll see here, we've got the TGTs. This one, the on-prem configuration hasn't been set up, so we just have a cloud TGT. And then there's a bunch of other bits related to cryptographic stuff. William can explain it all to you if you really want to take the time. Okay, so basic architecture. This is what how it works. We've got the PAM module and NSS module. NSS does user and group lookup, while the PAM module does the authentication requests. We have a central daemon called Himmelblau D that does most of the operations. This compiles with libhimmelblau, and libhimmelblau is the back end that does all of the fancy footwork. So Himmelblau D will send off requests to Entra ID and forward those on to the other services. We also have a tasks helper binary. The Himmelblau D daemon does not run as root. It has no privileges on the system at all, aside from just talking to Entra ID and responding to requests. The tasks daemon, on the other hand, does have root privileges because it has to do very specific things. It creates home directories. It assigns group memberships because we provide a local group membership assignments. It also distributes policy right now. I'm thinking I might split it into another daemon, but for the time being, it's distributing policy enforcement as well. There is also this broker dbus session service. The broker is the piece that mimics Microsoft's proprietary dbus service. They have a proprietary dbus service, and our broker mimics theirs and provides the same kind of responses, so that any other service that utilizes that integrates with the Microsoft tools can also integrate with Himmelblau, and that's why we have SSL. Okay. Whoa, there's an edge there. I walked too far. So the broker is actually a specification defined by Microsoft. They were very explicit about what a broker has to provide. Needs to be able to issue primary refresh tokens. Now, officially, the Himmelblau daemon combined with the dbus service are both a broker. I explicitly refer to the dbus service as the broker, but really it's just providing the services from the Himmelblau D daemon. It lets you do on behalf of token requests, which is really important. I got a lot of requests for that. Yeah, of course, it provides multi-factor authentication, and it keeps track of the device and session state, etc. Yeah, on Windows, it'd be implemented as a service, etc. So what does Himmelblau or libhimmelblau implement as a broker? We provide primary refresh tokens, as I mentioned, requests and manages PRTs, supports the on behalf of flow. We do device enrollment. We handle transport session keys, certificate bound keys, Windows Hello for business, which we call Linux Hello. Uh, Basically, it mirrors Windows behavior. That's the gist of it. Well, we behave the way Windows does. There are some minor exceptions because when you, for example, enroll a device or enroll in Intune, um, Microsoft treats Linux devices a little bit differently than Windows devices. So there are some minor detail differences between, well, okay, Intune is completely different on Linux, but Entra ID wise, it is very similar. I've got 10 minutes. Awesome. Some lessons that I've learned along the way. Many of the users are they're generally Windows IT admins. They have very, very basic Windows skills. And they're looking for some kind of unified approach to system management. And nothing like this exists now, not in the Entra ID world anyway. They're looking for the equivalent of Samba WinBind or SSSD. And they don't have that yet for Entra ID, not in a seamless way. Well, now they do. This is what they're looking for. Users expect a Windows-like experience on Linux with seamless integration, which is the reason for single sign-on, because they expect to be able to log in and they have access to their tools. They want to be able to shortcut Office 365 or Teams and be able to access their Teams meetings without extra steps, extra logins. With Himmelblau, you log into the device and it just works. They're looking for unified authentication in their server farms. They want machines in the lab to be able to authenticate users in a unified way, so that users can authenticate over SSH and they have secure MFA access to those hosts. So interestingly, despite Canonical providing a competing solution, the #1 user base of Himmelblau right now is Ubuntu users fleeing Ubuntu's solution. And I get a lot of complaints and acknowledgments and thank yous for providing something that actually works. Fortunately, like I said, Auth will soon be a Blib Himmelblau provider, and they'll be providing the same services. One of the big issues I run into is some users will prioritize convenience over security. They don't care about how secure it is. They just want it to be easy. And so we need to be providing both. So we're providing passwordless options. I don't know if you noticed, but when I authenticated in the demo, I did not provide a password. I didn't ask for it. I typed in the username, and in the future, I don't even have to type the username. I only provided the MFA over my phone, and then I created the hello pin. Now, the hello pin is device bound and is considered a second factor of authentication. So we are only doing MFA. Now, we can do password and MFA, but it does work to circumvent the password altogether. That's actually a user-defined choice. The user can choose to skip the password, and that's configured in Entra ID. Lessons learned about Rust. So Himmelblau is written in Rust. Some bits about that. As much as I like Rust, it is not a silver bullet. It does not solve all of our problems, and it does not avoid all security vulnerabilities. Most of the issues that I've seen stem from using unsafe code in third-party crates. William, he's shaking his head yes, he agrees. Sorry, nodding. My wife is always getting after me for doing that backwards. Another big issue is crate abandonment. When we're utilizing community Rust crates, sometimes they get abandoned and they don't get updated and they end up with security vulnerabilities. And then we have to go back and do major rewrites of our code because we were utilizing a package that nobody cares about anymore. So that can happen. This makes it a little bit difficult for long-term maintenance, and those are things we need to take into account. But otherwise, Rust is pretty reliable. It has a really steep learning curve, but once you master it, it's actually surprisingly easy to use. I think its biggest strength is as long as you don't have some major mistakes, major logic mistakes, once it compiles, it just works. And I love that about Rust. Yeah. So Microsoft cooperation. It's been kind of a mixed experience. So like I said, there's some in common on-prem AD products, and so Microsoft has documented some pieces, which was helpful. But for the most part, it's really lacking. There is no documentation for how the MFA works, and the device enrollment docs. They have some docs that were written. If you combine two of them at two different specifications and mix and match pieces, it kind of works. But for the most part, it's missing most of the details. Like, for example, it misses all the TPM integration and stuff. So it was obviously written long before they finished hammering out Azure services. There is zero transparency at all on Intune. None whatsoever. They don't document any of it. They don't collaborate on Intune. And it's kind of an odd disconnect because Microsoft built Intune for Linux, but then they didn't document it. And their official proprietary binaries, which, by the way, are only available on Ubuntu and Red Hat, are buggy and unreliable. And that's not just from my experience. Users have been complaining to me that Microsoft is over-promising and under-delivering. So... Yeah. So what I would encourage Microsoft to do is to get on board, because the customers want this, and the open development of this is thriving while their proprietary binaries are really struggling. And that's it. So we have a couple of minutes for questions. Go ahead.
You now have a key in your TPM. Can you get it out again?
Yes. William, you want to explain that? William actually wrote a lot of that code.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay, you just said no. So the whole point of the TPM is that it generates the cryptographic key and it can never leave the TPM. We have two modes of operation within the TPM library that we are using within both Himmelblau and the CunnyDM PAM and authentication stack. So those two modes of operation are using a real native hardware TPM, and in absence of that, we have a software-defined TPM. The software one, obviously, we are using strong encryption on disk, such as AES-256 GCM, which is an authenticated encryption scheme. But of course, this can be decrypted since we have to be able to use that in memory. So in that operation with the soft TPM, yes, you can extract those keys. However, when we are using the hardware TPM, no, they can never be removed from the device whatsoever. So when David demonstrated the usage of the pin is actually going into the TPM. The TPM has hardware brute force preventions to ensure that someone cannot attack that offline. And then only if that pin is satisfied by the TPM hardware will it then perform the cryptographic operation in hardware. So over time, there have been some features that David has needed that we have not been able to support with the hardware one. And so we've just been started. So for a lot of his code, it's still using the software side, but we are able to now use the hardware one as well for all of the operations that David is talking about here. And that is something that we've been working on this week is actually to make that finalized for the next release of Himmelblau. So for David's project, arguably the answer is yes, you can extract some of these keys, but in the future, no. That is the goal, is that you will never be able to remove these keys or the user's PIN from that device, because we want to make sure that this is a very secure experience for all of those users. And this goes back to what David said. Security is absolutely one of the most important things here, and this covers a large number of threat models. So yeah, so that's how that works. It's not my talk. Stop making me get on the microphone, mate.
Hey, you only got up once. And you nodded your head yes once.
So is this TPM key always tied to the, which is then stored, which is stored in the TPM, is it always tied to the user? So if I go as a different user, would I get also a new TPM entry, or could I?
Yes. So yes and no. So there is a single key that is bound to the device, and that parent key has child keys attached to them that are associated with each user that authenticates. So the first time a user authenticates, the device is enrolled in Entra ID. And then when another user, additional user comes along, I forgot to show that, but an additional user can come along. It doesn't re-enroll. It authenticates to Entra ID using the hardware-bound key, the device key, and as well as their own credentials. And then when they enroll a hello key, then they can, it creates a new key for them, a new nested key under the device. Also, I forgot to mention that hello enrollment can be disabled, and a number of people have requested that so that MFA is demanded every time they authenticate.
Thank you.
Okay, we're done. Thank you.